Hello, Fury. Good to see you again. So the last time we spoke, you had just left the job at Wrexham and made your way to Albirex Niigata over in the J League. So let's get into it. How hard was it to adapt to life in Japan and Japanese football as a whole?
Football was the easy part of it. It's a universal language after all. But I definitely had my struggles with the Japanese language and did have to go through using an interpreter during my first few months with the club. It kept me busy, as I did make it a point to get a tutor to expedite the learning process. My salary was definitely at a great place where I could afford doing that, and the chairman at the time, Sebastian Baquet, was very accommodating in terms of making sure that I was taken care of. As for Albirex Niigata, a part of the reason for me being proactive in applying for the job after leaving Wrexham was the idea of winning the AFC Champions League, but most importantly, because I felt they were still a very good team that could get me into the competition in the 2032-33 season. They were in 7th place going into the second half of the J-League season while only being 9 points away from placement into the AFC Champions League in a very competitive league, and that was not a bad place to be. But it was clear from the jump that they had a problem scoring goals, and that had led to some frustrating losses and draws prior to my predecessor being dismissed. So with the 4-2-3-1 and 4-2-2 systems that I tinkered with and used during my time at Wrexham, I felt that I had a good building block to start with in terms of the formation that I would end up using at Niigata. I also got an idea from just watching some old film to also incorporate a 4-1-4-1 to take advantage of the attacking midfielders we had on the roster. No matter what formation we played in, Sotaro Okazaki was the immediate key player we ended up basing our entire offense around. He had the right stuff physically, and being 22 at the time, he was starting to develop the mental and technical aspects of his game at the right time. There was also Motoki Nagakura, who'd been the other main scorer at the time of my arrival, and some other guys like Danilo Gomes, Daisuke Ikeda, and Takuma Ominami, who'd contribute to the latter portion of the 2031 season run. My debut game would end up being against FC Machida Zelvia, who were near the bottom of the table at the time. Using the 4-2-3-1 from the jump, the team really impressed me with how well they played around the tactic, as the game ended up in a 3-0 victory. We built on that by beating Avispa Fukuoka on the road, and then handled our business in the Emperor's Cup round of 16 against Yokohama FC. After the first 2 J-League games, the transfer window officially began in Japan, and we did have some players that wanted out of the club. I also wanted to bring a few players of my own to help make the push for a top 4 finish, so I ended up selling the guys who wanted out, like Joel Chima Fujita to Al Faisali and Satoshi Watanabe to Shimizu S-Pulse. Then, I used the money from those sales to grab Hiroki Yoshi from Shonan Belmare to be a long-term solution in our midfield, and also looked at England for some moves, bringing in defensive midfielders Lyndon Sheen from Burley on a loan, and midfielder wing-back Perry Collier on a free transfer. We were going to need it since we had then first place and eventual league champions that year in Vissel Kobe on the menu. We drew against them, which was much better than I had expected, just frustrating to give away a stoppage time goal to do so. But considering the circumstances coming into the club, having my first 5 games be 4 wins and a draw, it was one of the best starts I could ask for. From August onward for the rest of that year, I just kept implementing our tactical styles onto our training routine, and we got off to a flying start. During the early stretches of the month, I used the transfer money available to us to continue strengthening our side. We got Yoko Suzuki from Venforet Kofu, but opted to loan him back so he could continue getting some experience as a starter, confirmed a future purchase for German attacking midfielder in Maximilian Lorenz, and brought in Masaki Iwasaki from Vissel Kobe for 4.5 million due to his versatility across the center areas of the pitch, be it offense or defense. We did eventually have our unbeaten streak snapped by Kashima Antlers near the end of the month, and stumbled in some of our games afterward, but managed to course correct to beat Jubilo Iwata in the quarterfinals of the Emperor's Cup. The winner of the cup got one of the AFC Champions League spots automatically, and given how close the league positions were at the time, I felt that winning the Emperor's Cup gave us our best shot at getting into some continental football the following season. On top of all of that, given the amount of trophies that Albirex Niigata had won during its dominant run during the mid-2020s, the Emperor's Cup had always eluded him.
Was that part of the appeal as to why you focused so heavily on the Emperor's Cup semifinals and final over putting priority on catching up to Vissel Kobe for the J1 crown?
Don't get me wrong, we had a really strong finish in the J1 that year, but the first half of it and having the draws we did in the second half meant we couldn't catch up to Kobe by the end of the season. We did get into second place and would have automatically qualified for the AFC Champions League regardless, but it was a matter of pride at that point. We took on the former powerhouses of the J-League in Kawasaki Frontale in the semifinals of the Emperor's Cup, and admittedly, they weren't what they used to be, and we ended up dominating them in a 2-0 win, punching our ticket to the final against Avispa Fukuoka. Winning the Emperor's Cup became even more important because at the time we played that game, there were still 2 more J-League games to go, and we were at 65 points, while they were at 63 points. We couldn't say for sure what would happen in those final 2 games, so we just focused on what we could control. The game was at Sapporo Stadium, which was unusual, since Japan National Stadium was often the host of that final for many years. Nevertheless, we played it wherever they told us to play it, and on that evening, everything that we'd been doing since I came into the job started to come together. Fukuoka defended well for most of that first half, but after Collier scored in the 39th minute, and Okazaki then scored an absolute beauty of a goal to make it 2-0 before the half, it was pretty much curtains from there, because the team didn't stop in the second half. Okazaki scored the second goal, we added 2 more off of set pieces, and with that, Albirex Niigata could finally say they'd won every single major trophy in the entirety of Japanese football. The cup win also meant that we would be in the AFC Champions League next autumn, so I got busy prepping for the upcoming transfer window after the final. The chairman decided to inject a good amount of money into the club after we wrapped up the year, and with our budget set, it was time to make some moves. I sold one of our foreign fullbacks in Jacob Farrell to Al Wuhada for 3.5 million, veteran keeper Tomoki Hayakawa to Qatar SC for 4 million, and center back Tayo Koga went to Al Feiha for 1.2 million. I then used the funds to get center back Samuel Chenkua for 400k and paid 1.6 million to bring back legendary midfielder Hidemasa Morita to Japanese football before his retirement to serve as a mentor figure for some of our younger players. But along with the initial purchase of Maximilian Lorenz earlier in the year, we also signed 3 completely different but essential players who made their mark in our 2032 campaign in various ways. First, it was 20-year-old striker Tatsuya Shiza from Gamba Osaka, who we got for 6 million. Second, we brought in former J-League Rookie of the Year attacking midfielder Yotaro Araki on a free transfer. And third, we got Brazilian keeper Mateuzinho from Sport Clube Internacional on loan. After completing those signings, I felt ready to go into the Fuji Xerox Super Cup game, which is a yearly game where the J1 League winner plays against the Emperor's Cup winner. So that meant we'd be facing Vissel Kobe right off the bat to kick off the year.
At the same time, I can't help but notice that your 4-2-3-1 formation that you used in order to win all those trophies had changed quite considerably from the one you used during your time at Wrexham during that 2032 season with Albirex Niigata. What led you to make those changes? After all, you had won the UEFA Champions League with the original variation of that tactic.
I told you all before that I was not the best person at all when it came to tactics when I initially started my career as a manager. I believe that I improved with my time and experiences, but during that time period, I still had my doubts about the 4-2-3-1 that I had been using. Sure, it helped us win the Champions League, but I attribute that more to our players being able to be very diverse in the roles they could play, rather than say it was my system that got them there. I knew that if I wanted to continue this crazy challenge of winning the Octagon, I would need a tactical style that I could plug into any club that I was hired by, and that would allow us the best opportunity possible to win, and I felt something was missing. So, after some workshopping during the holidays with an old friend who was tearing it up in the Canadian Premier League at the time, I shifted the central midfielders to be a double pivot, with a segundo volante joining the attack on one side, and the other side having a regista that could dictate play, which was a role that would be a better fit for the style of pressing that I wanted my teams to do. The left and right sides of the defense, instead of having two fullbacks like before, I ended up tweaking it to where we'd have a wingback on the left to stay wider and join the attack, while having the fullback role on the right-hand side of the pitch stay the same. Then, we shifted the shadow striker to the center left of the attacking midfield, while the sole striker was positioned to the center right as a means of making the attacking flow much easier for the advanced playmaker on the right side, while still keeping the 4-2-3-1 asymmetrical look. With those changes made, I ended up debuting the variation of the tactic in that Super Cup game against Vissel Kobe, and we ended up scoring 3 goals in the first 25 minutes of that game. The game wasn't perfect by any stretch, as we did concede 2 goals and some defensive lapses, but after that Super Cup win, I felt something had finally clicked. It only got vindicated further after we opened the J-League season and defeated Ehime FC in a 6-0 routing, going on an unbeaten streak that would go all the way until the end of April, when Sanfrecce Hiroshima managed to be the ones to undo it entirely. Dating back to the 2031 season, I believe we had gone 18 games in a row without losing just during the league play itself. And we were advancing in our cup competitions as well, having beaten Yokohama Sports and Culture Club in the 3rd round of the YBC Louvain Cup. I do recall that we had also made some sales during that time frame in order to bring in center back Masato Inamori from Gamba Osaka for $4 million prior to the 3rd round of the Louvain Cup.
During your time in the J-League, Albirex Niigata managed to beat various teams across the entirety of the Japanese league pyramid, in all competitions that you played. But what was it about Sagan Tosu that made them so difficult for your teams to deal with?
Oh my god, those guys. They were an absolute pain in the ass to deal with through my time in Japan, and their variation of a 4-4-2 drove me up a damn wall just about every time I ran into them. They were just very good at limiting your chances and then making you pay for it. Sagan Tosu beating us 5-2 in June of that year was one thing, but the one that just irked me to no end was them eliminating us in the Emperor's Cup semifinal in extra time. Keep in mind that this Sagan Tosu team of 2032 were in a cup final while only ending their season 3 points above the relegation zone. It goes to show how incredible the J-League can be, but for me personally, it was very annoying to be on the receiving end of a loss like that. Sans the black mark to Sagan Tosu, we were running roughshod in every competition we were playing in during that summer. The goals and victories were coming in droves, regardless of who our opponents were and where they were on the league table at the time. While we had our fair share of injuries during that stretch, we had enough depth to carry us through. Ryotaro Araki basically revived his career on the back of the work he did during this stretch. Lorenz and Shiza were revelations up front with their goal-scoring abilities, and we only went from strength to strength once the July transfer window opened. We said our goodbyes to Sho Koide and Perry Collier during that transfer window, but reinvested the transfer money from those sales by bringing in wingers Kevin Siwe and Taha Ayari, fullback Toshiya Nakata, and bought keeper Philip Souza from Porto, as Mateuzinho's loan was going to expire at the end of the year and he had no interest in staying. By the time we got to September 2032, we'd wrapped up the league trophy with 5 games to go in the J1 and had made our way into the YBC Levin Cup finals after dispatching of YSCC, Avispa Fukuoka, and Shimizu S-Pulse to end up in the finals against Gamba Osaka. We were also trying to win all 4 domestic trophies during that time by getting into the Emperor's Cup semifinals, but you already know how that story ended, unfortunately. We thankfully didn't let our guards down during the Levin Cup final and recaptured that trophy for the first time in many, many years for the club. So, 3 out of 4 titles at the domestic level wasn't so bad.
And you did it in a dominating fashion too. But this does bring me to your AFC Champions League Elite Edition of 2032-2033 that started during the fall of that year. What challenges did the schedule congestion and the travel to various Asian countries present to you and your team?
Well, for the league phase portion, they did keep it separated between Western and Eastern Asia, and so our flights for some of the away fixtures were not as bad as they could have been if you mixed everybody in like UEFA does for their Champions League format nowadays. Although on our away legs, we were still traveling to China, South Korea, and Thailand in the middle of the week. I definitely spent more time rotating the lineups after we secured the league title in September due to those games in order to ensure that our main starters would be fully rested and ready for those AFC Champions League games. We had Bangkok United at home for our opener of the competition, and the home crowd at the Big Swan definitely helped carry us through that one, as we came out of it with a 3-0 victory over our Thai opponents. There was a struggle within the following games, as Maximilian Lorenz ended up scoring late in the second half to help us draw against Shandong Taishan, and we followed that with a lackluster performance against FC Seoul, where we were lucky to not lose. Thankfully, we had wrapped up all domestic competition games by the time we would host Arema FC of Indonesia at home. The team was able to focus solely on the AFC Champions League, and it showed as we shellacked them 5-0. While our form traveling outside of the country continued to be less than stellar after drawing with Yeongbuk Hyundai Motors a few weeks later, any and all frustrations from that draw we managed to take out on Port FC while at home.
Oh yeah, the 10-1 game, wasn't it?
I know footballing levels do vary from nation to nation, but that had to be rough to watch if you were a fan of Thai football. But at the same time, we were going to play our brand of football from start to finish, and if you can't stop my guys from scoring goals, that's on you. Kevin Siwe got most of his goals for the whole year just off of that one game. We also did qualify for the round of 16 of the competition off of that victory, so it was a very good feeling afterward. But we still had to wrap up the league phase of it, and thankfully, there were only Japanese teams left in the docket. Our travel ended up being far less hectic. The off-season ended up being extremely short due to the circumstances of the Japanese calendar and us extending our time playing into the AFC Champions League, but we play what the schedule gods throw upon us. We actually would start the year officially against Urawa Diamonds at the Big Swan for the Champions League instead of the Super Cup games set against Gamba Osaka. But before those games kicked off, I declined an interview with Porto, brought in defensive midfielder Georgi Todorov onto the club for 2.4 million, while selling Taha Ayari for 5 million to Ghent, before kicking off the season in style with a 6-1 beating of Urawa Diamonds. We took that incredible result and then gave Gamba Osaka a similar beating, with just one less goal involved in order to win our second straight Super Cup. There was the downside of losing our top 2 goal scorers to pull knee ligament injuries for the next month in the aftermath of those 2 games, but, well, we had to carry on. Thinking about the round of 16 of the AFC Champions League, I also sold center back Shinji Nomura for $375,000 and then brought in Inter Milan center back Domenico Bellavia on loan to help give us that final push. He fit in quite nicely as we opened the J-League season against Cerezo Osaka with a dominant victory, then wrapped up the league phase of the Champions League with a 2-0 shutout win against Vissel Kobe. So of course, it's my luck that we proceeded to get Vissel Kobe in the round of 16.
Playing the same team in a competition 3 times in a row had to be repetitive, but how did you feel about the format change the AFC had made to their competition over the past few years, where they actually mix up all the teams in the draws once you get to the quarterfinal stage instead of separating it until the finals like they used to do?
I think it gives it way more parity. Travel can be the harshest of mistresses, but I think that if you're trying to determine the best club team across the entirety of a continent as massive as Asia, you can't separate it by 2 regions until the very last match happens on the neutral ground like they used to do. So getting everyone in the same neutral space after the 2-legged round of 16 matchups and going at it in a similar manner to the World Cup, I liked it. We did have to get through Kobe first, and while I felt lucky to get out of Neuwier Stadium Kobe with a 1-0 win, I also felt a sense of relief, because when it came to being at the Big Swan, we were damn near unbeatable in that fortress since my arrival. So we defeated them 3-1 in the second leg, and we didn't need to go far for the quarterfinals.
That year's tournament was one in which Japan were the neutral site hosts.
And get this, Neuwier Stadium Kobe was the neutral site stadium chosen for all of the games from the quarterfinals onward. I still get hate tweets to this day from their fan base for ruining their possible AFC Champions League title win in their home ground. Cocky little bastards. They were good, but they weren't on our level. And I kid you not, we were on another level as we got that quarterfinal draw against Al Duhail from Qatar. By the time we had gotten to that game, we'd been steamrolling through the J-League and the Levain Cup games put in front of us. We hadn't dropped a single one of them yet. So Lorenz ended up scoring a brace, Siwe and Shiza added to the torture, and really, we dominated Al Duhail from start to finish through those 90 minutes. It was a 4-0 victory, and that put us on a crashing course against Ulsan Hyundai from the K-League in the AFC Champions League semifinals. To Ulsan's credit, they kept us off the score sheet for most of the game after we snuck in an early goal with Todorov. But they were running a 4-4-2 against me, and by now, my reputation as the 4-4-2 killer was well established. Eventually, that dam broke for them when Tatsuya Shiza and Daisuke Ikeda scored late in the game to win 3-0 and punch our tickets to the club's first ever AFC Champions League final. Our opponents for that final were FC Seoul, and I had not forgotten about the struggle of that league stage game against them in South Korea. They were tough, man. Maybe their form in their own league wasn't at its best during that time period, but they got past Al Ittihad and some other heavy hitters to get to that final. They were as battle-tested as we were, and I wasn't taking them lightly as we walked into Neuwier Stadium Kobe for the grand finale. At first, I thought maybe I worried too much since Ryosuke Yazawa managed to send an absolute rocket from over 25 yards out onto the goal to make it 1-0 in the 12th minute. Hell, I felt stupid in a way for working myself into overthinking all of this after we drew a penalty kick early on and Lorenz put it away to make it 2-0 for Albirex Niigata. I mean, even if Uros Kabic responded to that one with a goal 2 minutes later, we still had a lead, and as a team, we knew how to hold leads and how to even expand on them. In fact, we did just that with Masaki Iwasaki getting our third goal off of a corner kick set piece executed to perfection in the 61st minute. But to their credit, FC Seoul struck back about 12 minutes later with a goal of their own that our defense should have done a better job of containing. We made a similar error on an attack that went wrong 10 minutes later, letting them counterattack, and Kong Pil-suk scored the tying goal, dragging this all the way to extra time. And during the first half of it, FC Seoul drew a penalty in the 101st minute, which Schulze, thankfully, managed to save to keep the game tied. Besides that play, there wasn't really much that happened during extra time at all, and so it would be penalty kicks to decide whether I was going to win my third Continental trophy as a manager, or if I'd let it slip through my fingers and have to wait until next year. First, both Kong Pil-suk and Maximilian Lorenz would kick things off by scoring their respective PKs. Good start for us, at least. Dao Da Conta would bury his shot for FC Seoul, and Tatsuya Shiza would barely manage to do the same. Lee Dae-ho scored it up the middle, then it was Motoki Nagakura's turn, and his shot was saved. 3-2. FC Seoul had the advantage now. Kim Dong-woon, their captain, was up next for their fourth kick. And again, Philipp Scholze came through in the clutch with another massive save to keep it at 3-2 and to give us a shot at getting even again. It was Nogami's turn next, and Son Dong-hyun read him like a book on the save, parrying it far into the sky. Still 3-2, and each team was down to their last penalty taker. Park Chan-soo had the chance to win it all for FC Seoul. But that moment may have been just a tad too big for him. He shot it and it went out of bounds. Still 3-2. Maekawa was next, and this was a 17-year-old stepping up to take arguably the club's most important kick. But there's a reason why he was with the senior team since last year. He was built for moments like this, and he delivered. 3-3. And we were on to sudden death. It would be Choi Jin-hoon who was first for FC Seoul, and something told me that Chung-soo missing that previous PK was weighing on their minds at this point. So it didn't surprise me that Scholze managed to make another save. And thus, it basically came down to whether Masato Inamori could win it, or if we'd keep going for another round. All I could do was take a deep breath and watch. A 3-3 game, 4-3 on penalty kicks, and in the most dramatic fashion possible after a rather dominant run leading into this final, Albirex Niigata had won the AFC Champions League.
It was an incredible game to watch as a neutral, but out of your Continental conquests, where would you rank this one?
Come on now, man. They're all my babies. I love them equally. Don't try to get me in trouble here. I will say, however, that the chaotic nature in which how we did it, and just the force of nature that this group had become under the 2.0 version of the Fury 4-2-3-1 tactic, it made for a pretty great accomplishment. It got people's attention in the football hubs of the world that the guy who'd won an UEFA Champions League with Wrexham had now won Asia's equivalent to that with Albirex Niigata. Anyone who did the research would eventually know of the OFC Champions League win with Modest FC that kickstarted my European journey to boot. This was around the time in which I began to get certain offers from abroad. Some had me intrigued, but I wasn't keen on coming back to Europe, and the teams from other regions didn't quite have what I was looking for in terms of their infrastructure. So in the meantime, I was just resuming business as usual with Albirex Niigata, as we had the legs of the Levane Cup round of 16 against Yokohama F. Marinos immediately after that Continental title win. So, a few weeks later, an unlikely opportunity came across my desk one afternoon after practice. See, it's not exactly often that I was getting work emails in Portuguese into my inbox. That email exchange turned into a phone call, and with it, a trial run for a certain qualifying phase into the Africa Cup of Nations and the upcoming World Cup. I had an option to opt out and resign entirely if things weren't up to my standards, and they had the right to kick me out entirely if I screwed this one up. A fair exchange, really. Thus, for a certain period of time while also managing club duties at Albirex Niigata, I was taking on the role as the new manager for Guinea-Bissau's national team.
Okay, but Fury, why in the world would you double your own stress as a manager by traveling back and forth between two continents?
Please remember that I was still very much single at the time, and without any extra commitments outside of football. Besides not forgetting family members and friends' birthdays and sending holiday cards and gifts when the days were right to do so. Plus, the journey that I was on would eventually take me to Africa to manage at the club level. The sooner I could get a read on the lay of the land and get to know the environment for certain countries and their football teams, the better it would be. Plus, it's Guinea-Bissau. I could speak Portuguese freely with folks who weren't my mother or grandmother for the first time in forever. I managed in Japan with Albirex for another month or so and kept us top of the table there prior to my first game as an international manager, where we'd be at a qualifier match for the Africa Cup of Nations against the Ivory Coast. Not exactly the easiest assignment to get on your debut, and while the Fury 4-2-3-1 2.0 tactic was enough of a solid ground for this new international outfit, you have to remember that this was our first time actually playing it in a game. Ivory Coast's experience won out at the end as they scored in the 54th minute and held on to the 1-0 lead. I did breathe a sigh of relief when my assistants there told me that Guinea-Bissau had guaranteed qualification already for the Africa Cup of Nations as it was before I even got there.
That feels somewhat anticlimactic, doesn't it?
To an extent, sure. But that also meant there was less pressure on me to get them to that spot, and it just let me focus on getting the guys on the team used to my tactical approach and playing through it. We ended up getting Libya next, and Guinea-Bissau basically went to work on that game. 2 early goals, a 4-0 lead, and spirits were high as we then got the Africa Cup of Nations draw shortly thereafter. It placed us in a group with Ghana, South Africa, and Benin. So that was where the challenge for this managerial stint was going to be, given that Ghana and South Africa have, experience winning this competition. Although before I took off from Japan for that stretch of games, I had interviewed over the phone with a certain team in North America. And it had gone really, really well. By the time that I got back to Narita Airport, they had forwarded me a contract offer. Within less than 48 hours, I was back on another airplane and flying across the Pacific Ocean. The money was much less than what I was making with Niigata, but during the interview process, I had made it pretty clear to them that I was only interested in the position because they had just made the finals of their Continental Cup and let it slip through their fingers. So less money wasn't a deal breaker. I just wanted a short contract. They gave me a 2-year deal. I told Club America I would only need 1 year to crown them as CONCACAF Champions Cup winners.